Right, I'm going live, guys. Thank you very much. Yeah, okay. Hello and welcome to tonight's Truth Proof live stream. Welcome everybody. We've had a barren 2 weeks, as you know, but hopefully we've got a great guest on tonight, as Paul will introduce later on. So first of all, I've just got to thank everybody for coming on to tonight's stream. We know we're battling against outside barbecues because of the nice weather, which is great. But we know you Truth Proof followers are always around. So great to have you on the stream. Welcome all. I'll just go through a few names in the chat and let's have a look. Right, let's have a look. We've got Aldo Rain, Ralph Winter, Rebecca King, Space Cadet Lottie, Mark McClinchy, Alison Buttles in the chat tonight, Paul Tucker, Patricia Adams Wright. I'm going up the list backwards now. Chris Wright is in the stream. Welcome to tonight's stream, Chris. Thanks for joining us. And as you know, Skyflower is our moderator tonight. So any questions, please put in caps for Sky to send on to me. Also, we've got Mally Dodgson. Welcome, Mally. And Rocky Newson's. Let's have a look. Diane Farrell. And thanks for being in the chat, Diane, tonight. Let's hope you can stay with us, because I know tonight's guest is going to be great. So I've just got to make a public announcement here, and I've got to thank Steve Mary and Vitali and Chris Turner for the hospitality that they showed Paul Sinclair and I at the Blackpool Awakening Conference. It was a great weekend, guys, and I've got to say thank you very much. So on that note, welcome everybody. As I said, let's hit the show running. So it just leaves me to introduce Paul, who is going to introduce tonight's guest. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you very much, Les. We've had a few weeks off. We've had a great time, and just to echo what you said about the Awakening, very gracious and a good weekend had by all. But more importantly, I'd like to welcome Dr. Peter McCue to the Truth Proof live stream, retired clinical psychologist based in Scotland, author of 4 books on the paranormal. Peter, welcome.
Good evening.
No, you're more than welcome. And I know we've exchanged messages and spoke for a number of years. And obviously this is the first time we're going to speak at length on any kind of platform. And first of all, if you want to give us a little bit of outline about yourself, that would be good.
Yeah, I became interested in the paranormal and unusual phenomena when I was quite young, probably when I was still, a child actually. But and intermittently in my earlier life, I sort of dabbled in investigation and so on, and that kind of became more consistent and persistent. It may be in the mid 90s. I can't remember precisely. So old now, it's getting years. It's easy to lose track. But I've been interested in the subject for many years.
And do you have any experiences of your own that spurred that interest?
I don't know whether the experiences I've had, they've been relatively few, and they're open to interpretation. For instance, one in 2015, I think it was, I was on a touring holiday in the States, in the United States. It was actually basically a trip around various national parks. And at one point we spent, I think it was 2 nights in Salt Lake City in Utah. And the hotel I think I was on maybe the first floor, one up from the ground floor. I may be wrong there. And about 1 o'clock in the morning, I wish I'd made notes, but there was a sort of very heavy, frantic sort of noises from the room above me. It sounded like someone walking around in lead boots, and this went on for about an hour, and it was quite disturbing in a way. And I mean, it's unlikely that any kind of renovation work was going on at that time of the night. Um, whether it was someone who was maybe mentally ill, agitated and or trying to make a nuisance of themselves, even, I don't know, or whether indeed the place was haunted. So it was an ambiguous situation. Um, Another occasion, I came out of a place where I was working at the time. I was working in a sort of rundown part of the city, and city where I was working, and there were problems with cars being broken into and that sort of thing. And that particular day, I'd parked my car on the street, which I regarded as a dodgy place to park the car. And as I came out of the building, I had an uncomfortable sort of feeling that something was wrong. And when I got to the car, I found the quarter window had been broken and my radio had been stolen. But again, that could have been an inference based on the fact that it was a dodgy area and so on.
Yeah, I was just thinking that myself. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
But that's not normal for you. You wouldn't normally sort of walk out of a building and suddenly start thinking something's wrong.
Well, to be honest, in that area, there was always that sort of slight feeling of, there could be a problem. So I wouldn't put too much in that. There was
No.
another occasion years ago when I started reading about parapsychology experiments with people, Xena cards, the five symbols, and people would look at a card and try and transmit the image to someone else. And I just picked up a pack of playing cards, and the image, something like the 8 of clubs, came to mind. I cut the pack, and sure enough, it was the 8 of clubs or whatever had come to mind. But again, that could have been chance. It could have been that I somehow kind of had an idea the 8 of clubs was there and subconsciously stored the information. And when I tried it again, I didn't get it right. So
So does the psychologist in you always fall on that side of things? I suppose with the training, it's probably got to do, hasn't it?
Not really. My interest in the paranormal probably preceded my interest in psychology. So, and I'm open-minded about. I mean, just because I haven't had incontrovertibly paranormal experiences, I don't dismiss for one moment that other people have had. And I'm convinced by the weight of evidence, both experimental and from spontaneous cases, the sort of things that you write about in your books, that these the paranormal events do occur. So I mean, I've never been groped by a Tory MP, but that doesn't make me think that no one ever is groped by a Tory MP. And it would be absurd of me to say, just because I haven't been groped by a Tory MP, no Tory MP has ever groped anyone. So
I think we know where you are with that one. Yeah. So
yes.
so we've covered that the experiences that you've had are debatable. It's out there at the moment. So what made you kind of jump off the bridge to believing that? What particular case made you think that there really is something true to this phenomena?
I can't think of any particular one that stands out. It's just reading, cases in the more reputable literature. I mean, there's an awful lot of low quality stuff where people repeat vague stories and so on, folklore. But I'm thinking of laboratory experiments where people have done things, controlled conditions as best they can, or careful writers who've reported on experiences. They've interviewed the witnesses. I've done it myself. I'm not as much as you, but I've taken an interesting case, interesting cases, and been in touch with witnesses and compared the testimony and deemed them to be credible people, honest people, who are, and the idea that it can all be dismissed as a sort of illusion and misperception and so on, I don't find that very credible.
No.
And therefore I accept that, genuinely paranormal phenomena do occur.
Is there any particular case that you can bring to mind? Before I want to talk about Zones of Strangeness, one of your books, in a moment, but just before we move on from that, is there anything that just is in the front?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of material in Zones of Strangeness, including stuff that I've looked at myself. A case that I think that is of interest to you is Rendlesham Forest, and I had a knowledge of the outline of what happened supposedly happened in December 1980. But what interested me more about Rendlesham Forest was that I heard that there were reports of people visiting the forest subsequently, even perhaps to this very day, are coming away with reports of unusual experiences. And I went down to the area. This was quite a few years ago, and I was in touch with various witnesses, both when I was there and some witnesses there, and then subsequently. And I gathered some accounts of their experiences. And to be honest, a lot of what they were saying could be dismissed in psychological terms. I mean, if people say they feel a presence or see a kind of vague figure in the night, it could be put down to sleep deprivation, expectation, suggestion, and that kind of thing. Or they may be pre-selected because the people who spend a lot of time visiting the forest there at night may be strong believers, and this may be a kind of way of confirming their beliefs. However, a number of these witnesses that I was in touch with, they reported an interesting objective phenomenon, and not necessarily occurring at night. I think it was. I think it could be either night or day, where they'd be walking along through in the forest, and a stone would roll down near them, and when they pick it up, it would be hot or warm. And I got reports of this from different witnesses, about 7, I think. And then I subsequently heard of further cases. And when we were just talking about it on the phone, you mentioned one of them, a contact of yours. And this was a sort of poltergeist type manifestation. It was interesting because different witnesses were reporting the same sort of phenomenon, and not something you'd necessarily expect. You know, if you think of Rendlesham Forest, it's associated with UFOs. It seems to be a different sort of phenomenon, and it raises questions. I mean, whether these manifestations are generated somehow by the minds of the witnesses themselves, whether there's some kind of intelligence playing games with people who visit the forest. Maybe the UFO phenomena of 1980, if they were genuine, were themselves kind of paranormal rather than involving spaceships. Or it could be a mixture of both. But that was interesting.
And they talk about, well, they don't talk, but I'm kind of saying it. They don't probably use those words, but there's multi-phenomena experiences occurring in and around that forest, isn't there? You know, you talked
That's
about
right.
stones, and I've actually handled some of those stones when I went and visited Derek Savory. When we went to Rendlesham, myself and Steve Ashbridge, probably 10, 12 years ago, and he'd got a few of them at home. And I know Brenda Butler, who were one of the principal researchers at Rendlesham in the early days, she's had these stones land in front of her and talked about how hot they are. I mean, I should imagine, is Brenda one of the people you've spoken to?
Yes, yeah. I visited Brenda's home and I talked to her I think more than once. And we spent a few hours in the forest with a friend of hers, and met some other people there. The trouble for Brenda is because she's had so many experiences, the hardline skeptics are inclined to dismiss her. It's ironic that, you know, you've had a lot of experiences, therefore you're a crank, you know. Whereas if you've just had one type of experience, they may be less likely to think you're a crank. And that's probably very unfair to Brenda. I mean, whether her judgment about other phenomena is right or wrong, you know, her testimony about the stones could be, you know, is quite possibly genuine, and all the rest of the things she says could be completely genuine as well. But I think what happens with people like Brenda is that if they've had so many experiences, it's easy for the ultra skeptics. Oh, Brenda Butler, yeah, of course, you know, that's probably very, very unfair to her.
Do you know? Well, yeah, and in Brenda's favour, she said a few things, and I mean, she may even be listening to this, and she knows what I think of her, and I've lots and lots of time and warmth towards Brenda.
Yes.
And I think she spoke about going to a certain place and seeing cameras come up out of the beach, and I think a few people dismissed this notion years ago that this could have been possible. But do you know, Peter, I spoke to a lighthouse operator, one of the when they weren't automated, and he actually worked at Flamborough for a number of years, and odd times he'd go and become a relief lighthouse man at Orford Ness. And on one occasion, he said that he left the lighthouse and went and walked around the lighthouse, and there was a protrusion on the beach, and he looked down it, and it was a little camera. He said, and within, I'm not going to say minutes because that would be a lie, but within a short time, the military were there. They interrogated him, told him to never leave the lighthouse unless he was escorted, because they were escorted to and from it. So, although it weren't in the same place, we're in close proximity. There were similarities to what Brenda had said. That's not sort of bolstering Brenda's story, but you know, I don't think she embellished things. I think that she said it as she saw it, you know. And
she kindly, I mean, she was very kind with her time, and she also sent me some on a CD. I think it was quite a few anomalous photographs she'd taken. Now, admittedly, some of these orbs and things that appeared in the photograph, I got a professional photographer's opinion, and he thought that a lot of them were artifacts of, you know, because of the cameras being used, you know, outside the normal light conditions that you would normally use a camera in. However, there was one particular image which even he was very skeptical about paranormal things and so on, couldn't readily explain. And another thing that Brenda told me was that, well, someone else told me actually, not Brenda, that who knew Brenda, had been in the forest with Brenda, and he'd bought a camera and was disappointed he wasn't getting these artifacts or these images. But then Brenda said to him, "Let me have a go." And she took a picture, and immediately, you know, something strange appeared on the film. So the image. So it's interesting I mean, I did speculate about Brenda that maybe she was unconsciously catalyzing phenomena herself. You know, as in poltergeist cases, you sometimes find there's a person who seems to be the catalyst or maybe the source of the phenomena.
Yeah.
In the case of these things that were happening around Brenda, maybe she unconsciously was somehow the channel.
Yeah. It's possible, isn't it? I mean, and obviously that's going to come up in a question, because I saw a question about CE5 that we'll touch on in a while when Les gets to questions. But do you think that people are able to sort of evoke unexplained phenomena then, or be the catalyst for it? Is that what you're suggesting?
That's sort of one of the standard kind of theories in psychical research, you know, about poltergeist phenomena. You know, in fact, some people in the States, they use a different term. They don't talk so much about poltergeist phenomena, spontaneous recurrent psychokinesis. And the idea is that maybe we humans have a mind over matter of power, or some of us do, and it can be unleashed in certain circumstances. And some people maybe have more of that potential than others. And the poltergeist phenomena are essentially eruptions of this sort of psychokinetic ability or power. The problem with that, for me, is that these manifestations often are so technically involve such technical mastery. You wonder, well, how, if this is unconsciously being manifested by the poltergeist focus, how does he or she produce phenomena that are so technically amazing? I mean, in some ways, poltergeist phenomena can seem like that the activities of a mindless lout, you know, smashing things about. But yet, when you actually look in detail about what the things that happen, there's a sort of technical mastery there, which makes me wonder sometimes whether not sometimes, but it does make me wonder whether we're actually dealing with some sort of higher intelligence.
But the higher intelligence of the poltergeist that's acting, let's assume it's acting as the poltergeist phenomenon. Yeah. It doesn't seem to advance that much, does it? It's almost childlike in its behaviour. It moves things around. I'm not dismissing what you've said, but it's not developed, has it? It's not.
That's right. It's a paradox. You're right. The phenomena seem sort of annoying and a bit yobbish in a way, and yet technically, how the hell can they? You know, it's beyond the skills of probably the best conjurers, and you know.
Have you seen evidence of poltergeist activity then?
I remember visiting a house. It was the tail end of an investigation. I was a member at the time of the Scottish Society for Psychical Research, and I became involved in a case. where a poltergeist phenomena had allegedly taken place in the house. And I visited the house with a couple of, I think 2 other people from the society, and the place was a bit of a mess. I mean, there'd been allegedly quite an outbreak of destructive and paint being splashed about, things like that. If I remember rightly, the cases I've personally been involved with where the physical phenomena have tended to be milder, and sometimes it's been harder for me to distinguish between the poltergeist aspect and maybe a haunting, or whether it's linked to the place or whether it's linked to the people. I'll give you an example. It was a case in Scotland where a family, a man, his partner, and the partner's daughter were experiencing phenomena in their home, and it was things like sense of presence and footsteps, I think it was. But a particular thing that sort of disturbed the man was he had a metal container in his living room, and he had in it 3 folded £20 notes, I think it was. And in the morning, he went to this container to get the money for some reason, and he was perturbed to find the money was missing. When he returned to his house at lunchtime, and I don't think anyone else from the family had been back in the house at that time, lying on the coffee table were 3 uncreased £20 notes. It was almost a sort of trick, mocking him.
Trickster element, isn't there, to it?
Yeah, a trickster element, definitely. And again, the sort of the technical aspect makes you wonder, well, hang on, how's this happening? And yet, what's going on? It's just something making its presence felt for some reason.
And you were talking about poltergeists being different to spirit activity.
Well, hauntings.
Hauntings.
Yeah.
How do we differentiate the two?
Well, it's a traditional distinction that psychical researchers have tended to make between cases that are essentially linked to places and cases where the phenomena seem to center around a particular person. The latter would be the more poltergeist type case. The other difference is that in cases that are sometimes categorized as hauntings, the manifestations may be primarily or mainly sensory, seeing things, hearing things, sensing a presence, feeling temperature changes. Whereas at the poltergeist end of the spectrum, as it were, it's more physical, things being thrown about, displaced. And there are some, long-running cases which are primarily sensory, or wholly sensory perhaps, and there are a lot of cases, it seems, where there's a mixture, and it's a bit hard to tell, when you classify it as poltergeist or haunting. What I would tend to say is, in terms of the traditional distinction, if you've got a long-running case where phenomena are occurring at a particular location, notwithstanding a change of personnel, maybe one family's moved out, another family moves in, phenomena continue, and the phenomena largely restrict themselves to that locality, that would probably in traditional terms be called a haunting. Right. Whereas in a poltergeist case, if the people afflicted moved to their relative's house, the phenomena might follow them there. Yes.
And obviously then it's focusing on an individual or individuals. Do you think the emotional state then plays a part in evoking and getting these things to present?
Yes, yeah, I think so. I think particularly, probably, I'm guessing a bit here, particularly in poltergeist cases. I think there was a case in Florida some years ago at a store. I think the store dealt with Florida-themed items that people could remember. Florida ashtrays, with shaped as alligators and things like that, and objects were being chucked about, and boxes of things were falling from racks, and the phenomena seemed to center around an employee, a young employee, and they were quite sort of physical, but the young man was under observation and was never actually, I don't think he was ever actually seen to be doing anything, you know, deliberately throwing any objects, but the things revolved around him. And it was speculated that the phenomena were perhaps related to unconscious frustration or aggression or something like that. You know, that in that case in Scotland I mentioned, there was this is very, very speculative, but a possible factor could have been that the daughter, I mentioned her daughter, that she'd moved with her mother from a city and she missed being with her friends in the city and didn't really like being where she was. So, I mean, you could speculate that the phenomena were in a sense an unconscious way of expressing dissatisfaction about being where she was. But that's very speculative, and I can't confirm that's the case.
Speculation again. How much then do you think we unknowingly can project and produce any of this? Maybe not even some outside influence that's doing it, but us.
Well, I think that's a possibility. It's a possibility. And in my latest book, it's about curses. I talk about the notion of the traditional idea of a curse is that you don't like someone, you perform some magical ritual, or maybe make an effigy of the person, stick pins in, and then that person suffers misfortune or disturbing paranormal phenomena. But I've raised the question, could it be that harmful influence can occur you don't have to actually go through a ritual, simply having negative thoughts about someone, could that in itself, you know, without you realizing it, actually have an effect? There has been some experimental work looking at influencing other people's physiology, or bringing about healing. And it might be, you may, for instance, have a situation where you've got the subject of the experiment is in one room, and his or her task is to raise the heart rate of someone in another room at random intervals selected, and then this person in the other room is connected up to monitoring equipment, and at random intervals, you know, right, you now to kind of try and raise his heart rate by an act of will, as it were. And then we can see what the heart rate is, and we can then do a statistical analysis and see whether the physiology has changed in accordance with the schedule of, you know, intended interventions. And some positive results have been reported. I think they tend to be small, but they have been reported. Problem with that is it's hard to know whether it's a mental effect. Is it the person in this room mentally affecting the other person through telepathy, or is it a direct physical effect on their body? And equally, as I say, there are studies suggesting that healing intentions, you know, if you take 100 cancer patients, divide them randomly into two groups. Group one is the treatment, group two is a control group. Nothing more further happens with group two. But with group one, people are asked to pray for them every night for a week. And then you compare, you know, their outcome, you know, then you may find that maybe the treatment group have done slightly better or a bit better. Now, if that's true, if positive influence can work, or if just neutral influence, raising heart rate or something like that can work, it's possible that negative feelings can, you know, have an effect.
Equally so, yeah.
Even if there isn't an explicit cursing ritual, it's not a nice thought, is it, to think that if someone doesn't like you and you get cancer, that not liking you could actually have played a possible role.
You know, I mean, obviously on an individual level, I mean, I think we've all felt it. When you start to feel depressed, no matter, you can't lift yourself out of it, can you? You know, and it's difficult. You should kind of know when that's lifted, but you also know when people have got a downer on you, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And you can kind of feel the weight of that influence. Or if you're out in a bar or in public and you focus on somebody, or you can feel like you're being watched and you turn around. I'm not saying it works every time, but there is an awareness there. I don't know mechanics of it, but there is an awareness there. And I guess to say we'll never know would be wrong, but I don't think we're close to understanding it at the moment, are we?
Yes.
So zones of strangeness. And is there any particular more cases that you'd like to talk about in that book?
Well, there are lots of cases in there. One that I investigated it was an area. I was informed about this area, I think it was in 1999, by someone called Andy Beaton. There's a loch near Inverness, close to Loch Ness. Loch Ness is much bigger than the loch I'm about to mention, called Loch Ashy. And Andy Beaton had been asked by a woman whether he was aware of any battles occurring there. I think this is basically what she asked. And the reason for her asking was that her brother had had a couple of odd experiences there. At one time he was fishing from a boat on the loch, and he heard voices, and he heard what sounded like the clashing of swords. And this disturbed him, and I think he kind of gave up his fishing for the day and went home. He was a bit perturbed by that. On another occasion, he was sitting at the side of the loch fishing, and he looked around and saw a figure with a cloak on, I think it was, coming towards him. And he returned his attention to his rod and then looked back again, and there was nothing there. And Andy found reports, or I think at least one, of literature suggesting that there had been in that area sightings of a phantom sort of battle, of warriors or soldiers lining up for a battle or something of that nature. And I got interested in this case, and you found some similar kind of reports. I mentioned the case in an article in Scots magazine. This was years ago, and a woman wrote to me from Cumbria in England saying that she'd been brought up in Inverness, and she was a schoolgirl, and she came back to her parents' shop in Inverness, probably about 1944. And there was a shepherd talking to her father. And apparently he was asking whether the father knew of any battles near Loch Ashy. And he related an experience that he'd been by Loch Ashy minding his sheep, and a mist had come down suddenly. And then he'd sort of seen scruffy looking men with sticks and I think swords heading towards the sound of a battle. And this, in fact, I'll just read. I'll read what my informant said to me about this, just so I can give you the words more or less straight. This is Zones of Strangeness, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
And just before you read it, can we have questions in capitals, please, for Peter? I know that Les has asked and Sky has, so
yeah,
just re-emphasise that. But thank you.
So what I've written here is Dr. June Barnes was brought up in Inverness but now lives in Cumbria. Having read a magazine article in which I briefly mentioned the Loch Ashy case, she provided details of a conversation that her late father had had with a local shepherd, some of which he had overheard. Her father, Archibald Munro, had a fruit and sweet shop in Tomnahurick Street, Inverness. Barnes wrote, I vividly remember calling into the shop on my way home from school in about 1944 or 1945 to find my father deep in conversation with the man. He was telling my father about a supernatural experience he had had some days before when, looking after some of his sheep near Loch Ashy, a mist had suddenly descended around him and he found himself in the middle of a strange battle. Now, it should be said that that was slightly inaccurate. He didn't actually see fighting. He just saw warriors from one side.
Yeah.
Very frightened, he had hidden behind a nearby boulder or big stone, while all around him, men in ragged clothes fought each other. And as I say, it appears that the shepherd didn't actually see any fighting as such. He saw just people from one side of this conflict, it seems. He heard them yelling and calling and felt a desperate sense of dread, but none of the fighters took any notice of him. He noticed that they had bare legs and bare feet, and some had short swords, while others had sticks. They had long, matted hair and were very dirty. The shepherd had no idea how long he had remained there, but I got the impression that the battle went on for some time and had frightened the wits out of him. So that was what one report. I wrote to 4 farms or 4 buildings in the area, dear householder, I didn't know the occupants. I got no reply from two of them. You know how frustrating this subject can be. No reply. One person wrote back just simply saying, haven't seen a thing or haven't experienced anything. But another one wrote to me, Mr. McIntosh from a farm in the area. And I'll just quote from him. Let me just see. Yes, my father was a gamekeeper and therefore knew the land well. One day he looked up, this was from a cottage he was living in near Lochashi, looked up the hill and saw loads of men on horseback coming out of a fort-like structure. Sorry. He went back into the house and called his wife to look up the hill, but didn't say he saw anything. She immediately said, "What are all these men on horses doing?" They watched them for a while and they disappeared into the hillside. They put it down to freak weather conditions and a mirage. So these were the sort of reports I was getting from Lochashi. Another type of phenomenon that people reported in the area had been reported, and I obtained testimony from one witness, was phantom car sighting, where someone is driving along, they see a vehicle coming towards them, it's temporarily obscured by a bend in the road, and then when they get there, there's nothing there. So that's my impression is that these phenomena at Lochashi have sort of fizzled out. I haven't heard of anything of note lately.
It kind of seems locational based, though. Obviously,
Yes.
Lochashi, it's got to be, but I'm on about as a whole, because you've got something as absolutely diverse as a phantom car sighting, and then you've got the battle from God knows when, probably hundreds and hundreds of years before, and the guy who was immersed in it, the shepherd, he can see it, they can't see it. Well,
another problem about the Lochashi case is that there's no historical record of a battle being, any sizable battle being fought there. The nearest battle site is about 8 miles away at Culloden, where the Jacobites were finally beaten in 1746, so the Battle of Culloden, east of Inverness, but that was a few miles away. It's possible that the shepherd sighting and maybe some of the others were related to some sort of clan battle. The other possibility, I suppose, is that there could have been some sort of clash between invading Vikings and maybe the Picts or whoever, the people living there at the time were. Another possibility is that these ghostly phenomena are orchestrations and they don't actually relate to anything historical. Something is just playing games with us,
Yeah, the trickster element. What do you think to the mist? The strange mist sort of, I don't know, developed, and then he saw, because I mean, I don't mean it's reported in all accounts, but you hear that quite often. A strange mist suddenly descending. I know that in Wales, we've got a contact to a cryptid sighting, and he was sat in a car, a VW Beetle car at the time, and he commented that in a car park close to an inhabited area, populated area, should I say. And he reported when he went in with his girlfriend that this strange mist suddenly appeared in the car park, and he felt a bump at the back of his car, looked in his mirror, and he saw this weird thing come down side at car. We'd like to get him on a live stream at some point and talk about it. So I won't say his name, but he has been good enough to come from Wales and spend a night with us in relation to Wolflands. But the mist intrigues me. What any views on that?
I'm not sure. I mean, it is intriguing whether it's a kind of the experience might be. It's hard to know whether there's any objectivity to it unless you've got a photograph or a film, or whether it's a hallucination. But even if it's an hallucination, it may be a paranormal hallucination. In other words, if something may be seen, there may be nothing physical behind it, but if more than one person sees it, why are 2 or 3 people having a hallucination? Yes.
Yeah.
Another idea I've floated at points in my writings is that ghostly experiences may be distortions of memory rather than perceptual experiences. Imagine, for instance, you're driving along country lane in, say, East Yorkshire, And then, well, this, imagine you go to a police station and the policeman, the desk sergeant says, yes, what can I do for you, sir? And you say, well, I was just traveling along such and such a road and I've had a very disturbing experience and I thought I should report it to you. Well, what happens, sir? Well, I was driving along and suddenly a woman ran out in front of my car and she disappeared beneath the front wheels, and I was horrified. I didn't feel any jolt, but I've stopped the car, checked under the car, couldn't see a thing. And I've checked the verge of the road, either side, and there's nothing there. But I can't imagine how I didn't kill her, and the police then go back with you to the site, they conduct an investigation, they can't find any trace of a body. And then perhaps it turns out that other people have had similar experiences in that area. Now, traditionally, people sort of take that at face value and think that you've seen something strange.
I know what you're going to say, yeah.
But it could be that what's happened is your memory's been warped, and a kind of editing of your memory. You were driving along, you were actually thinking about the next game of golf you're going to play with your friend or something like that, and there's suddenly a false memory is impressed on you that you've just run over a woman. Your memory's been edited. This is the paranormal phenomenon.
I thought you were going to say, because of the previous story, the history of the road, that memory was there and people can create that scene themselves.
I'm suggesting something more radical, though, that if there's an intelligence that can mess about with our memory, maybe that memory, you've reported genuinely, you truly believe you seem to run over a woman who kind of acted like a suicidal maniac. But it wasn't a perceptual experience. You didn't actually see anything. What's happened is your memory has been tampered with, so you truly believe you've had that experience. Because when you report an experience to the police, the report is based on memory, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if a false memory has been put in there, paranormally, perhaps, that it might be, in other words, naive to assume automatically that it's perceptual, that you've seen.
So if we haven't seen it, then, Peter, and it's a false memory, but you're jumping off the fence and hypothetically and saying some other intelligence could be placing that memory there. What is the other intelligence? Is that the paranormal? No.
I don't know. I mean, this explanation could be applied to the UFO experiences.
Yeah.
I mean, let's take abduction experiences. Now, there are sort of the range of views. The traditional ones are the extreme skeptical views, that people have report these experiences are fantasy prone, imaginative, or they're simply inventing stories for attention or something like that. Then at the other end, you might have people who will take them very literally and think that people have physically been abducted by aliens. Then the more psychic kind of explanation that it's more of a psychic experience. Now, if it's more of a psychic experience, one possibility is that this memory alteration is occurring, that the person has a missing time experience, and then they recall an abduction scenario with alien figures. And again, could it be that this memory of the abduction is an inserted memory, but not physically true, which isn't rejecting the theory, isn't saying it's all imagination. It's something more sinister than that, actually. It's saying that the people's memory can be altered, and it may be a paranormal memory distortion. It's funny, I wrote about this I wrote an article on this subject, and I submitted it to The Psychologist. That's the magazine, the house magazine of the British Psychological Society. And this magazine took itself, perhaps still does, very seriously. First of all, the editor reviews a thing and decides whether he's going to or he or she will consider sending the article for review by peer review, and then it gets sent to, if it gets through that stage, it gets reviewed by colleagues, and they may write back to the editor and say, we think this is rubbish, or we think this is good, or it needs a bit of alteration. And then eventually your article might be published. But my article didn't even get to peer review. It was rejected. And it was rejected in what I thought was a sort of rather arrogant way. I don't think this article appeals to a professional audience of psychologists. And it seemed really kind of silly, because of these cases, lots of cases of ghostly experiences, and it was giving it just a slant that maybe paranormal memory distortion does occur.
I love that angle. I like where you're coming from with that, and I've got to admit, I've not thought of it from that perspective. Before we move on, Peter, unless you want to carry on with that topic,
that's okay.
We'll just ask Les if he's got any questions, because I'm sure people will have fired a few across at him. Les?
Right.
Yes, thanks for that, Paul. Great show so far, guys. Thank you very much. Some great questions in tonight, and we've got to appreciate the fact that people are sending in questions for you, Peter. Patricia Adams Wright is asking, Peter, what is your opinion about the well-meaning CE5 experiments?
The well-meaning CE5, close encounter of the fifth kind. Could you elaborate what she means by those?
I think it's the what Pat means. It's the Stephen Greer. I think the guy Stephen Greer.
Oh right, yes.
Stephen Greer, yeah.
Claims to have developed a technique where, and I don't know enough about it to say what he's doing, but I imagine that by some kind of thought process, we're evoking UFOs.
Right.
Correct me. People will correct me, because I've never even looked into it. So.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a summoning phenomenon, isn't it? That is it going to? Yeah.
And summon my wife to get me a beer.
Yeah, my understanding is, if I'm right, that Stephen Greer takes the idea of alien visitation quite literally. Is that correct? He does think that the visitors, and that it's possible to contact them. Another possible view of these sort of strange UFO experiences are that they are basically psychic events. Now, I'm not dismissing the idea of visitation, but it could be that these things are more of a psychic nature, and that if you're trying to elicit them and sending out thoughts to aliens, for instance, and then something happens, you may be instigating a paranormal process. And whether, if you do have an alien contact experience, that could be part of the psychic experience rather than actual visitors from another planet. I'm not disputing the idea that there could be visitation from by aliens, but I also wonder whether some of the UFO experiences are basically psychic events. In other words, there might be no fundamental difference between seeing a UFO in the sky and seeing a ghost. One's on the ground and one's in the air, but they're both ghostly in a sense.
So are we talking about the same trickster element then that's placing these?
I'm speculating here.
I realise that.
Yes, I'm thinking of cases such as the Skinwalker Ranch. You've heard of this in Utah, northeast Utah. Just in case any listeners aren't familiar with it, this is a ranch in northeast Utah, and the area, it's in an area called the Uinta Basin, which has a history of UFO experiences, and this ranch seems to have been a kind of hotspot for strange phenomena of all sorts of types: cattle mutilations, UFO sightings, poltergeist phenomena, ghostly experiences, sightings of strange animals, strange orbs, radiation anomalies. The ranch was bought in, I think it was 1996 by Robert Bigelow, the property and sort of aerospace entrepreneur who was interested in paranormal. He was funding an organization called the National Institute for Discovery Science, and his organization conducted a scientific studies there. They didn't actually manage to record a great deal of stuff on instrumentally, but members of the research team did experience phenomena, and the previous owners, a ranching family, they certainly had some very disturbing experiences. They lost some of their cattle and so on, and so the cattle, were subject to mutilation phenomena. Eventually, I think it was in 2015, Robert Bigelow sold the property to another rich businessman, Brandon Fugel, who has himself financed scientific investigation, which has actually been televised. There have been a couple of series, I think in this country, Curse of Skinwalker Ranch. I think in the States it might have been The Mystery of Skinwalker Ranch, something like that. Just going back to Robert Bigelow, while he was owning it, he received a grant from the Defense Intelligence Agency in the United States, quite a lot of money to pursue research in certain areas of anomaly, and some of that research was conducted at the an observation was conducted at the Skinwalker Ranch, and it does seem that quite a lot of phenomena were experienced during that time.
It kind of tells you, if to receive a grant from the Defense Intelligence Agency,
yes,
which is no small thing, that they take it very seriously.
That's right.
What's being seen there.
What's interesting there is this overlap between all these different types of phenomena. I've thought for some time that people in the UFO and paranormal investigation areas, they often live in sort of
bubbles,
artificially demarcated areas. They segregate it. Get some. Sorry, mate, we're not interested in UFOs. We're into ghosts.
Yeah.
So they don't want to hear about UFOs. And if you're talking to someone who's had a ghostly experience, and they may not want to mention the UFO experiences they've had because.
Hear that?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Hold on. I think I've touched something. That's brilliant. Okay. I touched the keypad. They maybe think that the investigator isn't interested in hearing about UFOs, or think I'm nuts. I've already explained, I've told you all about these ghost sticks, and if I mention these strange creatures I'm seeing or the UFOs, they'll think I'm even more nuts. So they might not mention it. And if the investigators don't ask, they might not hear it. So they kind of continue believing that ghostly phenomena belong in a different domain from UFOs. And the other way around as well. The UFO researchers who maybe like to think that UFOs are a nuts and bolts craft, they might not ask about ghostly experiences or Bigfoot sightings and that kind of thing, because they think it's nothing to do with
it's poor investigation, in my opinion. I mean, there's some great investigators of UFOs who focus on UFOs, just like you said. But to me, I've said it before, they're missing a trick, because ultimately there is a link between them all. And I mean, the Bigfoot, the cryptids, not forced to be traveling in UFOs. I don't mean that's the link. And it could be as simple as the actual location and the areas that are something within the area enables all these multi-phenomena events to take place. Or it could be what you touched on earlier, which I've never really thought about, that there's some intelligence allowing us to see things, projecting these images to us, and just wanting to one hive mind. It's an interesting theory, but I mean, Skinwalker, what a fabulous place. But do you know where we are at the moment in East Yorkshire, at Speeton, Bempton and Flamborough? We've got, at times, I don't mean you could probably go for 6 months, a year and not see anything, but there's things happening all the time. And just before we move on to a question, Les, I just want to thank who sent me this letter today with the information, because I think you'll be watching it. So I do thank you. And the earliest Christmas card I've ever had. Thank you very much, sir. It will be going up. And we've had quite a few reports in this week, which I'll be getting to Don, who organises and runs the Truth Proof website. So I shall be getting the information together for Don Lodge, and he'll be putting it on. But thank you very much. I really appreciate that. That report is excellent. So more questions, Les, please, for Peter. Unless I've cut you. Did I cut you off with what you were saying there, Peter?
No. I was going to say, the more questions. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I did see Don Lodge in the stream tonight earlier, Paul.
Okay,
so I don't know if he's still on with us. And I've got to welcome everybody who's just joined us to the stream, and thanks for coming on. So yes, I do have another question. The question is from a nickname, and the question is, what does Dr. Peter find most compelling about the unknown or paranormal? What is the most compelling thing about the unknown and the paranormal?
Gosh. I find so much of it sort of intriguing. It's not easy to explain. There seems to be good evidence that the phenomena are occurring, but they're enigmatic. And I can think of UFO cases, haunting, poltergeist type phenomena, time anomalies, overlap between Bigfoot phenomena and UFO phenomena, which seem bizarre, But so it's across the board, really. I think there are intriguing questions here, and I think it's absolutely foolish to be kind of an 18th century scientific, thinking you're scientific by being skeptical and just dismissing it a priori, saying these things can't happen, it doesn't fit with my worldview, I'm not even prepared to consider it. It just seems absurd to me. And I think the true spirit of science is one of inquiry and wanting to not close your mind and say it doesn't, these things can't, I can't accept these things happen, therefore I won't even consider them.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Well, Les.
Okay. Thanks for that. And I've got a question here from Tony Worrell. Could Peter explain the difference between a shook and a shug monkey? Now, I think the shug monkey refers to Rendlesham Forest, I think. Yeah.
Are we on about cryptid-related information?
Yeah, and I think the shug is a black dog.
I can't answer that because I'd have to remind myself of these terms.
Yeah.
I think I think I remember Nick Redfern writing about the shook monkey or something, but I know that there have been alleged sightings in Rendlesham Forest of unusual creatures, among other phenomena there. There was one story that I think Nick Redfern in one of his books told of someone seeing something like a chimpanzee, a large chimpanzee there, and another, it may have been a couple, saw a creature that sort of frightened them, and I don't know whether it melted away in front of them or something. I'd have to check really.
Yeah. And the shook, I think, like Les said, it's referring to black dog law, and I think it's different counties that have different.
Oh, black shuck. Sorry. Yes. So I do know what black shuck is.
The black shuck, the Padfoot and the Shrike. They're all these names given to basically what is
the black shuck in East Anglia in particular. It's got that, it's a black dog, sort of a phantom black dog. There's even a rock song by The Darkness, Black Shuck, with a bit of bad language thrown in, on their debut album. These black dog stories are funny. They're interesting if you compare them with alien black big cats. There's certain differences. I mean, it's even been suggested it's maybe just in folklore rather than maybe in fact that they can be portents of death or bad luck.
Yeah.
But I think from what I understand, that's not always the case. If you see one of them, it doesn't necessarily mean someone's going to die. I've even seen a report of the appearance of a phantom dog that seemed to act as a protector.
Yeah.
Where a woman was walking along and there were some labourers and she overheard them saying what they'd do to her if it hadn't been for this dog that was with her. And it wasn't actually her dog, but the presence of this supposedly phantom dog had deterred these would-be attackers, from raping her or murdering her, whatever it is they had in mind.
In up and down the east, well, more so in North Yorkshire, we've got stories. And in other parts of the country, I would think of the Barguest, the phantom hound. And in most instances, it's a fearsome hound that's said to be a portent of doom. But in some cases, like you've just said, it's reported that it is a protector. So it's interesting. I wonder, I mean, let's assume that there's a grain of truth in all of these stories, because a lot of it's from folklore, Peter. I wonder if it's a person's intent or mindset that brings about the experience that they're going to have with these things.
Yes, Yeah, or it could be that if you take the view that some people have maybe more highly developed than others extrasensory perception. Let's say, for instance, and maybe even the ability to influence other people's minds. Let's say you pick up the impression you're walking home, you're a woman, you're by yourself, that some men lurking about have negative intentions towards you. You sense that, and then you can somehow generate psychically an apparition of a dog to protect you. There are even actually, I mean, if you look at Bigfoot stories, I mean, my impression from reading the literature on Bigfoot is that whether we regard them as physical or not, they're basically concerned maybe with protecting their territory. They're not terribly malignant creatures. They might frighten people, but it seems to be more to get people away from their territory rather than kind of doing any real harm. But there are a few reports. I've seen 2 or 3 reports of the Bigfoot actually coming to the assistance of people.
Right.
You know, now I don't know that happens very often, but whether these reports can be believed. But it's nice to think that they might be. But
Well, yeah, no, that is true. I don't know.
interesting, yeah, it's not really a sort of paranormal story, but I don't know whether this is true. But I was reading not so long ago about a man in, I think it's California, Northern California, who was watching a black bear and its cub or cubs. I don't know how many cubs there were. Then he was jumped on by a cougar, a mountain lion. But the mother bear allegedly attacked the cougar and chased it away. And then after the cougar left, the black bear just left the man and went back to the cub.
All right. So it's got a.
Yes.
Well, we'll never know whether that's true, but it's an interesting
Yes.
story. So, well,
Yeah.
we'll ask Les if there's any more questions, and
Yes, I've got a lot of questions in
Really
tonight, but I'll probably squeeze one in before I let you
Yeah,
continue.
please do,
And this one's from G Hawkins. And by the way, Tony, that last question was a good question. That one, because it's obviously invokes a lot of response from Peter on that one. G Hawkins is asking, in relation to areas of strangeness, does Peter have any knowledge of the particular areas that experience high levels of animal mutilations?
Yes, yeah. I think the Southwest has had that in the past. I think Devon. There was a book that I read years ago. I've forgotten the author's name now. I can find out if you bear with me a tick.
yeah, all
I
good.
like to give chapter and verse rather than sort of make things up accidentally.
Well, you look for that, Peter, and
Yeah.
I mean, I've no reports to read, but and next week we will be talking to Paula Elizabeth Green, but we'll devote one of the live streams in next 2 or 3 weeks just to going through a few of the reports that have come in recently, namely this one I got today. We've got one about a sphere of light that's a brilliant one from a guy called Paul. I'll not say his surname. Then we've got one from Sweden involving a cryptid encounter, you know, and I'm just looking at, and from the 14th of June, let me get it, yeah, June, we've got a UFO at Skirlington, which is very close to where I live, a brilliant report that I just got yesterday. So that's what I said. I'm going to get these sort of condensed a little bit to put onto the website, and Don hopefully will do that for us in next few days. But it'd be good to go through them and share them a little bit, and that's just give me a chance, Peter, to.
No, well, that's okay. I found the stuff that I was going to. I'll just read this if you don't mind. Just get it accurate. Dartmoor. Dartmoor in Devon is the largest moorland area in southern Britain. According to a Wikipedia article, it covers 368 square miles. Its highest point is High Willhays, which is 2,037 feet. Along with other parts of southwest England, it's a popular recreational area. It has also a reputation for strange events. However, to some extent at least, that could be because the area has attracted more attention from writers on folklore and ghostly experiences. Such authors might be less likely to write about drab, overpopulated areas with little appeal to tourists. Animal deaths and mutilations. In an internet article, Mike Freebury indicates that a large number of mysterious animal deaths have occurred on Dartmoor over the years. Now, I was writing, I should say, this is in 2012, so the situation may have changed. 1977, 15 dead and mutilated ponies were found near the hamlet of Postbridge in April. That's April 1977. There was apparently speculation that they'd been dropped or violently thrown into the small valley where they were discovered. But according to Redfern, in 2011, I think that was a book, the Dartmoor Pony Society suggested they'd probably died natural deaths at various locations on the moors and had been dumped together by a farmer who was unwilling to pay for their burials. So we've got these different interpretations of these deaths and so on. 2005, 7 sheep were found dead on a hillside next to Pew Tor on the 2nd of January, and a large but traumatized ewe was found in a nearby drainage ditch. From a post-mortem, a local vet concluded that the dead sheep had been killed by having their necks broken. Evidence suggested that prior to being killed, they'd been confined in 2 holding areas approximately 6 meters apart, although there were no marks indicating that that temporary fencing had been used. The killings had apparently occurred in full view of a nearby farm, but without attracting attention. 4 sheep were found dead on the 14th of October within a half-mile of the site of the previous incident. The tongues of all the victims had been removed, and also some of the eyes. The following night, I'm not sure whether Freebury means the night of the 14th to 15th October or the night of the 15th to 16th October, 4 more sheep were killed on Barn Hill. Again, the victims' tongues had been removed and also some of the eyes. But a BBC News item dated the 19th of October 2005 gives a different account of the sheep deaths that month. It states that farmer Daniel Orford, the person who had found the 7 dead sheep in January, discovered 6 dead sheep with broken necks and eyeballs removed while doing his rounds on Sunday morning. That was presumably the 16th of October. 4 of the sheep were laid out in a square. The article states that the other 2 were found near stones and apparently arranged to make a pagan symbol. I raised this discrepancy with Mike Freebury in an email to me in June 2010. He noted that although there are only 6 victims photographed, there were 8 victims in total. Yep. The information came from Mary Orford, who took me to the crime scene in November. So that's the sort of thing. I could go on, but that will give you an idea of the sort of. So that's one area. I think another source would be Paul Sinclair. Tommy Paul, just to interrupt, how do you pronounce your name?
Sinclair.
Sinclair?
Yes.
Sinclair.
Yeah, Sinclair.
Right, it's just that someone told me in Scotland people say Sinclair, but
no, I've never been known as Sinclair, but I mean you can do if you like.
No, right. But you are a source of reports on mutilations. I think I've read all of your books. And I think
2017 to late 2019, it was prolific. It was. Obviously, we're here to listen to you, Peter, but I spent the best part of 18 months going on to a certain location at 4:30 in the morning, coming off at 8. You didn't find carcasses all the time, but I was finding them every week. And until this unfortunate farmer had lost, I don't know whether he'd lost, well, it were 50 sheep. And in amongst the sheep, we were finding roe deer, badger, fox, birds. Interestingly, the birds that we were finding, that were in the latter parts as the mammals, should we say, the deer, fox, and sheep were sort of not. Well, I'll tell you why. He removed them. He removed the sheep. He'd suffered enough that he didn't want to put them on there anymore. So that could have been why. But not only that, what clinched it for me was the fact that I wouldn't say very quite close to where this place was. We've got the North Sea, and anglers were finding porpoise. You know, the little dolphin, huge holes through the jaws. We know that they're nothing like a sheep, but primarily the injuries stemmed from the throat of the sheep. And it almost looked like a paint scraper wedge had gone through them in some instances. And I don't want to get too graphic because I know that YouTube doesn't like us being too graphic, but eyes once again removed, front left leg, ears removed. We took a drone one day up onto the fields, nothing to do with the sheep. We just, after the seabirds had left, we need to tell the people that because there's a bird sanctuary up there. We took a drone up to get a few shots of the walking along the cliffs and things, and we found one. Head had been removed, and if people can picture a paint roller, what you use for your walls, you could pull the fur and look down, and you could see where it had been removed from, almost like the breastbone. Really strange. We never found the head, but I found lots and lots of them. So, and I never found out what we're doing it because I know a lot of people have said, "Oh, it's some kind of strange, macabre Satanists," for want of a better word. I don't think it was. I were coming on them fields in the darkness. Primarily as well to stop the people who were telling me that crows had taken the eyes and other birds had scavenged on the eyes. Don't forget that they weren't just, these sheep were fully grown ewes, 80 kilos in some instances. You can't turn them over when they're laid down, and when you turned the head, the eye had gone at the other side as well. But I were going at that time to find them as close to the source as possible. It was macabre, and I'm glad it stopped. I'm glad it stopped for farmer involved, and I think it stopped in area, but once again, we're in that zone of strangeness where lots of things. I've no answer to what we're doing it, Peter.
For the benefit of the questioner, if he or she doesn't know this case, there was another one, another area that has reportedly had seen a lot is Northern Ireland,
right,
in County Londonderry. It's booked by, I think it was Carl Nally and Dermot Butler. I think it's called Circle of Deceit or something like that. A recent book, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I've reviewed it on Amazon, and if you find the book, you can see I've summarized the case there. And a very large number of this farmer has experienced a very large number of losses, and the reaction of the authorities was a bit strange because I think the police were at one point did set up cameras, but they wouldn't share. Allegedly, they wouldn't. I think if I'm remembering correctly, they wouldn't share the footage with the farmer, which seemed odd. I did write to one of the authors asking, I think I asked whether these phenomena, these deaths were continuing, but I didn't get a reply, unfortunately. But if the book can be taken at face value, it certainly does seem to be has been that particular area. I think it's County Londonderry or County Derry, depending on whether you're a nationalist or a unionist. But that seems to be in a very prolific number, a number of deaths.
So, have you done with the questions for a moment, Les?
I have for the moment, but just at this point, we're just going to do a little bit of housekeeping.
Okay.
So, Paul, if you can tell people where to report any reports, what the name of the website, which is on the screen for the benefit of the viewers, but tell them what they can do there, Paul, please.
Just put your reports into truthproof.uk. If I don't get the report, Don Lodge will get it, and he'll either act on it because I've full faith in Don to put these reports up if he thinks they're valid. You can contact me direct, Paul Sinclair, all lowercase, ilf@gmail.com. And the books, the Kindles are available on Amazon, and the paperbacks are available on truthproof.uk. And we could do the same for Peter, yes, Les?
Yes, exactly. And Peter, where can people find your 4 books?
Amazon is probably the best known source, yes.
Well, there you are. I put some links in the description for tonight's show, guys. So,
and Peter, are you happy to give out an email address? Do you want contacting with information or?
Yes, I could. Yeah, my email address is peter.mccue. That's MCCUE @virginmedia.com.
Lovely. And obviously anything related to the unexplained you will address. Okay, yeah, well, we can probably do a few questions later on, but there's something I want to talk about because I know Peter's got, I don't want to say extensive knowledge, but you've got knowledge of it, and it's Amphia Liath Moor. Tell people what this is, Peter, please.
Well, you're a braver man than I would put it in English. You know, that's Gaelic.
You're going to do that. You're going to do that.
No. Yeah, what Paul's referring to is what a phenomenon that from years ago actually called the Big Grey Man of Ben Macdui. Ben Macdui is the second highest mountain in the British Isles. It's over 4,000 feet. It's not a particularly stunning mountain to see. If you could, just to give read, it's in the Cairngorms in the Eastern Highlands of Scotland. If Les, if you could put up the map of the outline map, just so people can see the area.
Yeah, it's on there now, Peter. Yeah.
I'm not seeing it.
On.
Probably there might be a delay of a few seconds, Peter. So if you
want. Oh, right.
You see it yet?
No.
No worries. It's all good. So, just give us an overview as though you can see it.
Okay. So it's a high level plateau, and Ben Macdui, although it's high, it's not a tremendously scenic mountain, and it's getting to the top of it's quite a hike, because whichever way you approach it, you've got a long walk, and it's a place to be careful of in winter, because if you get cut off there, hypothermia, you have an accident. It's not a place I'd advise going by yourself in the depths of winter. Certainly not without telling someone where you're going and telling them what time you expect to get back, but preferably go with the companion. So are you able to display the photos? There are two photos of Ben Macdui that...
Can you see the picture, the map picture now, Peter?
No.
No.
I can see you, I can see Les, I can see me.
Well, don't worry, I'll be assured, I think the map will have come up, so...
Oh, right. So have you got the one of the pictures of the mountain now?
Yeah.
Which one have you got? Have you got the very snowy one, or the one with less snow? Right, that's a picture taken from Cairngorm, which is another peak over 4,000 feet, further north, looking roughly southwest. And the Ben Macdui is the sort of rounded ice cream-like lump on the left. It looks quite near Cairngorm there. That photo may be zoomed, I can't remember, but it's actually a few miles away. So if you're trudging across the plateau in heavy snow, that might be quite a bit of a challenge. But the other picture is a zoomed picture of Ben Macdui from the south. And that big rounded sort of thing on the left of the picture, that's the summit somewhere around there. And back in the early 20s, I'll just go to my written source here just so I get this right again. Yeah. There was a professor, John Colley, a professor of organic chemistry, I believe. He lived between 1859 and 1942. And he described an experience at the annual general meeting of the Cairngorm Club in 1924. And this is something that had happened years previously. The exact date of his experience is a bit of uncertainty. It seems to have been around 1890 or the late 1880s. And he explained that while descending from the cairn, the pile of stones marking the summit on Ben Macdui, he began to think that he was hearing something more than just the sound of his own footsteps. For every few steps he took, he heard a crunch and then another, as if someone were walking after him, but taking steps 3 or 4 times the length of his own. And eventually he was seized with terror and took to his heels, staggering blindly among the boulders for 4 or 5 miles until he was nearly down to Rothiemurchus Forest. The different version of the same incident occurred in an obituary published after his death, but it too claimed that Colley had heard mysterious footsteps on the mountain, had become anxious and had fled. Now, there have been a number of similar kind of reports over subsequent years, not a vast number, and they're described in a book called The Big Grey Man of Ben Macdui by the late Affleck Gray. the experiences of this type haven't been confined to Ben Macdui itself. There's another mountain further to the west. There's an experience that's been reported there of someone feeling they were being followed by something big. So the question is, how genuine are these experiences? It seems unlikely, even if we take these experiences as being as true, that there's actually a big hominid or sort of a big gorilla or something living up there. It would have been, over the years, it would have been seen more often. So if these phenomena, these reports are genuine, they may be of a ghostly nature. The figure may be of a kind of a temporary materialization or an apparition rather than maybe a flesh and blood creature.
It strikes me that the location is repeating the same type of phenomena over and over, unless this is the impression that due to one strong story that people are getting.
Well, that's right. Because it's a well-known peak. It's the highest in the Cairngorms, and the story may have passed around a bit, and it could be that people are having experiences on other bits of the Cairngorms, but they're not reporting them so much. I did at one point. I'm just looking for. Yeah, I've got a section here in my chapter on the case saying, are people still having these experiences? The above mentioned experiences date from the late 19th century, the first half of the 20th century. But in the preface to his book, Gray states that, quote, climbers continue to have these odd experiences as testified by the letters I continue to receive. And this preface to his book is dated spring 1889. However, he doesn't specify the nature of the reported experiences, and he doesn't describe any recent incidents.
Well, 1889, there's nothing recent there. Have we got any?
Sorry, 1989, 1989, yes.
1989, right, okay.
But according to someone that's called Hasty, there are still persistent reports of the sound of footsteps on the lower slopes of the mountain, although he gives no details. A few years ago, now I was writing this in about 2010, a few years ago, I contacted Tim Walker, then principal of the National Mountain Training Centre at Glenmore Lodge on the northern side of the Cairngorms. Given his local knowledge and background as a mountaineer, he might well have heard about recent experiences if there had been any. But although he was aware of the legend, he had nothing to report. In 2007, a couple of people called Stephen Pedler and his father informed me about some sounds they'd heard one day in June 2006. They'd set out to climb Skur and Lochen Uaina, I'm not quite sure of the pronunciation of that, and Bray Riach in the Cairngorms. This is a few miles, I think, to the west of Ben Macdui. They took a path, and I won't read all the stuff, but they heard some footstep-like sounds.
So,
a very dramatic report occurred in the Daily Mail in September 2004. It described an experience that allegedly befell two men, Tom Robertson and Derek Blake, in July of that year. Robertson, whom the article describes as being, quote, Scotland's most famous ghost hunter, unquote, was camping overnight with his companion near Lurcher's Pass, which I think may be what's perhaps better known as the Larry Grew Pass, when he reportedly heard footsteps. And I've put here, if the men were camping near Lurcher's Crag, they would have been some 3 miles from the summit of Ben Macdui. Blake also heard noises. According to Robertson, through the canopy of the tent, they suddenly saw the outline of a dark shape against the moonlight. It appeared to be 10 to 12 feet tall. A huge arm allegedly reached over the tent, which then collapsed on Blake's side, and, quote, all hell let loose, with the men hearing a loud mumbling noise and being thrown around like pieces of paper. Something allegedly hit Robertson's feet, and his toes were badly bruised. The tent's fly sheet was torn off, and through a gauze air vent, Robertson allegedly saw a creature that looked like a giant grey gorilla. The attack suddenly stopped, and the creature departed. Fearing its return, the men headed down the mountain at first light, abandoning their tattered tent. but before leaving, Robertson took photographs of what appeared to be massive footprints in the gravel. After less than a mile, Robertson collapsed, clutching his chest. Blake wrapped him in their two sleeping bags and made his way to Cairngorm Ski Centre to raise the alarm. Robertson was rescued and the remains of the tent were recovered. John Allen of the Cairngorm Mountain Rescue Team refers to the incident in a short film about the Big Grey Man that was made in 2005-6 and which can be seen on the internet. Allen's team was apparently involved in the rescue. He states that the men's story about their experience, their encounter, was made up, although I don't know whether that's an inference or is based on some sort of admission made by Robertson or Blake.
So Peter, apart from that one, all we're hearing about really are sounds, footsteps, and turning the footsteps into this big grey man. I mean,
them being thrown about and bruised and so. However, that's so out of keeping with the other accounts. The other accounts, it's more about people being terrified and running away and having a sense of fear and that sort of thing. But in this case, if the story can be believed, and I think actually this story is available now in a book by that chap Robertson. I haven't read it. But I don't know how credible the story is.
No, well, I do want to go there this year, to be honest, and spend at least 3 days there.
Yes.
And I hope to get there. I really do. I mean, me and Les are still sort of busy with Wolflands, yes. But when that's kind of wrapped up, I want to get there. I really do.
And I'll just read you this if you don't mind.
Yeah, go on.
Some of these stories may be outright inventions or a mixture of fact and retrospective falsification, deliberate or otherwise. Genuine experiences might be explicable in terms of prosaic physical and psychological processes, such as the misinterpretation of normal sounds. One of the people interviewed in the aforementioned film explained that he had heard footstep-like sounds behind him when he was on Ben Macdui. The sounds ceased when he stopped walking, but started up again when he resumed walking. It transpired that they were caused by coffee splashing about in a half-empty flask in his rucksack.
Really? So, I mean, well, yes. Interesting explanation, but I mean, how does that, the sounds that we're hearing from all the other accounts, were they all coffee? Do you know?
Yeah, well, there aren't that many of those accounts, and they're spread out over years.
Yeah.
And I, as far as I'm aware, you know, the area doesn't. I mean, maybe wrong here, but the area doesn't generate many reports nowadays. And as I say, around the time I was writing that book, I wrote to that chap Tim Walker, whom I thought would know the area well. And I thought, well, if this is happening regularly, you know, on Ben Macdui or thereabouts, he'll have surely have heard it.
And just before we go to some more questions, because I think I'm right. I think we've probably got a lot of questions for you here, Peter. There's an area called Devil's Point there as well, is there?
Yes.
And does that have any stories attached to it? Because, you know, usually.
I think the Devil's Point, it might get its name. I think another translation of it from the Gaelic is Devil's Penis, but maybe it was it was kind of turned into point. I think I'm right there, but but I'm not aware of anything. I've been on that. I've been to the Devil's Point or near there, but I'm not aware of anything specific about that. You know, in the paranormal sense.
Only because I've been looking into and contemplating going to Ben Macdui. I've been looking into the area, and I found a few stories about the screaming at Devil's Point and voices, sort of, I don't know, distressed voices. But that's all I've found. But I mean, no way am I any kind of authority on that. But if you want to wrap Ben Macdui up, because what we'll do, we'll get a barrage of questions and we won't get through them. Am I right in thinking there's questions, Les?
Yes, we've got a lot of questions in. Do you want me to start now?
Please do, yeah. Are you happy with that, Peter?
Yes, fine, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Right, Adam Sandor is asking, Dr. Peter, do you have an opinion on Dr. Chris French's approach to the subject? Dr. Chris French, I think, is a psychologist on the paranormal.
Yes, I've met Dr. French, at a conference and had a chat with him. He's obviously a background in psychology. The area that he talks about, his area, I think he may have retired now, I'm not sure, but a nominalistic psychology. And it sounds a bit like kind of using psychology to explain or explain away unusual experiences. And Dr. French and colleagues have conducted various experiments over the years where they've shown how people can be, perception can be misleading, and that's all very true. But personally, I don't think the fact that people can succumb to illusions and misperception and memory distortions negates the wide range of testimony for paranormal phenomena. The stuff what I've been talking about in the last half hour or so is perhaps in that area where the anomalistic psychologists could probably explain a lot of it. I gave the simple example of the coffee splashing about in a flask, and people have heard the legend of the big grey man. They stop, it goes quiet, they walk away, they hear it starts up again. My goodness, it's here, it was real, and you can imagine people actually freaking out and thinking that there is something on their trail. So there's merit to the anomalistic psychology. However, I don't think we can explain away all this sort of evidence in terms of the whole evidence for paranormal phenomena in those terms.
He's the guy that will wheeled out every time anybody comes on the TV to say that they've seen something or experienced something.
Yes.
He finds an answer to prove that they haven't really, doesn't he? I'm no disrespect to Guy. In some instances, he's probably 100% right. But yeah, I like what you say. It's good. Go on, Les.
Yeah, Mark McClinchy is asking Dr. Peter, do you think paranormal activity is at certain locations or drawn to certain people? I know you touched on this earlier, Peter.
I think it's probably a bit of both. Certainly, I think there's little doubt that it can be associated with particular people. Certainly, I think that's. I mean, when I was working, I had a patient who had a whole string of experiences. They seemed to follow him around. Ghostly sort of paranormal. Haunt type experiences, a few UFO experiences as well. There did seem to be a connection with him, but to some extent. I don't know whether the flats and places where he had experiences, it would be interesting to know if people moved in there after he'd moved on, whether they too experienced the phenomena. But I do believe there are also cases which are place linked. There are cases in the literature where phenomena have gone on for maybe 100 years or something like that, intermittently. So in that time, that there would be presumably be a turnover of people. No one person would be consistently in the place. So I suspect that there are both place-linked cases and person-linked, and possibly you get the most activity when you get a combination of that. I mean, Paul, I know you don't want to talk about yourself, Paul, but you're in an intriguing position. And I said in a review of one of your book, your personal book, Night People, that you seem to have an interest in these phenomena, but you happen to move into a house, and even the local vicar, I think it was, tried to give you a warning. You sent the man. You sent. You sent
Tom Willis.
Sorry.
Reverend Tom Willis, Britain's official exorcist.
Was it he who you said?
It was Reverend Tom Willis who came, and someone else had told him that new occupants had moved in, and I think he arrived about, I don't know, 5 or 6 days after we all moved into the property. My girls remember, Mary remembers, and he came and he wanted to bless the house, and interesting. And if I write another book, may as well say it now, I'm going to write a book about him, and I've been in archives this week looking at information connected to Reverend Tom Willis, because I've got some people already whose homes that he's exorcised who are willing to talk to me, and he passed away, I think 2009. But a really interesting guy.
But it does sound as if your house, your property may itself be haunted.
There's a lot of stuff happened here, Peter. Seriously. As I've said before, I've converted this now into 3 flats, and Bob Brown is in the top flat, and there's a lot of things happen up there, but that's where it were happening before when we first moved in. And when I wrote Night People, and I know you've read Night People, it were almost as though everything had stopped while I lived at Sprotborough Road. Very few little, not a lot happened at Edlington. I lived at Sprotborough Road, and when we moved up here, it's almost as though everything's pre-planned, because it literally started. Bang, 1993 stroke 4 to 1998. That was the most active time. Then it stopped again. And now we've got these stones. That we heard one last night. We can't find it, but we heard the noise. But we keep finding these stones, which is similar to what you were on about last night, but they're only about 10 mil. But I need to get on with the questions, Peter. It's about
okay.
It's your show, and I'm sorry, Peter, because it's about you. So let's have another question, please, Les.
Yeah, I think just for the benefit of people coming onto the stream who don't know about the stones, can you just give a quick couple of sentences on that?
It's probably been about 4 weeks now, and I think everybody will experience it in their own home, as in you'll be sat there in the quiet or watching TV and you'll hear a click and it sounds like a kettle's gone off or a light switch. And we heard this for a week or two. We didn't know what it was. It were in the hallway and kitchen. And I ended up sleeping in the spare room, which is this one night. Not had a fallout, by the way, but I think about 1:10 in the morning, I'm still awake, and I heard it on the laminate outside. It went, and I knew instantly it was a stone, and I found it. And since then, we've found about 12. When we hear and we get up, we couldn't find the one last night, funnily enough, and we've got about 12, and they're about 10 mil. I've given them a rackle in a little plastic tub on a live stream a few weeks ago. Don't ask me. I don't know what they're about, but there we go. More questions.
Okay. Yes. Thanks for that, Paul. Very interesting. Andy Ross, Ghost Whisperer, is asking Peter. Yeah, welcome to the show, Andy. Why do you think poltergeists seem to build up slowly and then disappear so quickly? If that's the case.
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether how frequently they disappear quickly. I'm just trying to. I don't know whether the data bear that out, but if so, I can't really answer that authoritatively. I'd need to think about that and think about.
Well, does Andrew mean that it dies down for a period of time and then it slowly builds again? And does it come in waves?
Does it come in waves?
It's
certainly. I think he's right saying that they can sort of build up. You know, first of all, there's some scraping noises or something, and then a bit more, and then it gets more violent. But I'm trying to think whether it necessarily ends abruptly or rather than being intermittent. An interesting thing about poltergeist phenomena is that although people typically think of the disturbances as short-lived, weeks or months, there are some cases where they've gone on for years. There's a place in Scotland, it's no longer, I don't think the building's there now, called Pitmilly House in East Fife, and I think the phenomena there went on for about, on and off for about 37 years or some quite lengthy time, and it was sort of very physical phenomena, fires and that kind of thing, not just sort of hearing footsteps and sort of low intensity haunt phenomena. So it's and again in the case of Pitmilly House, I can't remember whether it ended abruptly or whether it was sort of a rather more intermittent thing at the end.
Okay. Right. Well, move on to another question then, please, Les.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that, Peter. Stevie 071 is asking, what do you think about people who report seeing humans shapeshift, mostly into reptilians?
Well, I don't know what to think really. Whether the reports are genuine. If they are genuine, whether they're experiencing something psychic or whether they have experiences like that all the time. Whether they can see things shifting in their perception. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Did you know?
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
There are an interesting phenomenon related to that question. Is this the phenomenon of the black-eyed children? I don't know whether there are a couple of books by David Weatherly that to deal, at least 2 books dealing with this phenomenon, and there have been some reports from Britain as well. They're not very frequent, but the typical encounter might be that someone is in the house, maybe alone, in the evening. It's getting a bit late. There's a banging on their door rather than ringing of the bell, and the person's a bit puzzled by that. They go to the door, they open it, and they see a couple of children, maybe 12 to 14, something like that, 10 to 12. They're looking down, and the children, or one of them, a spokesman for them, makes an odd request. They ask to come in. It might be some sort of slightly dubious sounding reason, like to make a phone call or to watch a bit of television, which seems a bit strange. The person feels a bit sort of perplexed and disturbed by this. And then the spokesman, or maybe both, look up, and the person notices that they've got completely black eyes. And that confirms their senses that this isn't right. They sense a horror, and they close the door on these entities. The knocking at the door continues for a bit. The householder is traumatized and fears that he'll have another, or she will have another encounter with them. But in practice, it doesn't. These tend to be one-off incidents. It's also suggested that if you do let them in, that can bring bad luck, very bad luck, or something. So, is this folklore, or is it, or these genuine reports? The Weatherly presents some very interesting cases. The trouble is they're sort of fairly heavily anonymized. I don't know whether, I can't remember whether he used pseudonyms, but it might be a first name, and it's a bit hard. And I don't know how much corroboration there has been of the accounts. It has been suggested that these reports are a reaction to the folklore of maybe the 90s, when programs such as Buffy the Vampire Slayer were being screened, and X-Files and so on. And if these programs had people with black eyes, it's also been speculated that maybe some of these experiences are generated by hoaxes, people using black contact lenses. Although according to Weatherly, he's found cases which predate internet and so on. So
is it localized to a specific area, or is it UK, worldwide?
Well, it seems to be worldwide, but I don't know how common it is, and I don't know to what extent the stories are invented. Do you want me to give you an example, a specific one?
Yeah, but then we'll get to some more
questions.
questions.
We haven't got time, perhaps, with the questions. Yeah.
Because the great people in our chat, and they'll give Les an hard time if you don't get as many questions out as possible.
No, that's right. But it's an interesting phenomenon, disturbing if it's true. But
yeah. Okay, and thank you, Sharon, for the question.
Steve.
Right,
Steve. Yeah. Okay. Andy Ross, Ghost Whisperer, is asking, does Peter think some of these sightings could be some sort of time slip?
I'm a bit doubtful, to be honest. I'm a bit doubtful. The idea that people are literally sort of going back in time, it sounds a bit doubtful to me. I wonder whether it's more of a psychic event with a kind of hallucinatory aspect to it, perhaps with memory alterations occurring. But I mean, I can't be sure, of course. I'm not sure about anything really. But
so you don't think with the battle that you alluded to earlier, I forgot what the location you said. You don't think
yes.
You don't think that we're sort of seeing some kind of time slip, some kind of tracing from something that actually happened in the past, some thin area?
Well, my guess is, again, I'm not sure. My guess is that if it is related to something that's historical, it's a representation rather than a literal going back in time. There's a certain degree of theatricality about some of these things, even the mist and so on, and the shepherd. And when I didn't have time to go into all the accounts, but with Loch Ashu, the stories vary. I mean, in some cases, the alleged accounts involve cavalry as well as, maybe people not on horses. Other cases, it's scruffy looking men running towards some sort of sound of battle. In other cases, it sounds like a much more organized kind of
It sounds like Bridlington.
Yeah, so it sounds more like representations, drama, theatre, and it's just conjecture on my part, really. But I think but I think there's a theatricality that underlies a lot of paranormal phenomena. It's almost as if something is putting on a show.
Yeah,
and it's a dramatic show, and
but it's only for one person.
Or it could be for more than one person, but it's a kind of it's quite good at theatrical performance.
We'll get Les to give us another performance of a question, please, Les.
Yes, I got a question from Mick Park. If you're still with us, Mick, welcome to the show. Yeah, what are Peter's thoughts on the supposed connections between burial mounds and werewolves?
Well, I mean, I'm going to cop out here and defer to Paul on this, because I know that Paul's a bit of an expert on werewolves.
Well, I don't think we're experts, Peter, but it does seem to figure that these things, if they're real, I believe there's a reality to them, no matter what shape or form we want to attach to it, are seen around ancient burial mounds and earthworks and places where early man has left his mark, and that's all around the world. If we go to Egypt and we've got Anubis, guardian of the dead, it's almost as though there's some kind of keeper,
I could give one story from Scotland. It wasn't a burial mound; it was a tomb. But in 1936, Sir Alexander Hayes Seton and his wife Zayla, then wife Zayla, were in Egypt, and they reportedly went on a private visit to a tomb. And while they were there, the wife, Zayla, effectively stole a piece of bone from a skeleton.
Right.
And I don't think her husband knew about it at the time, but she subsequently admitted to him to what she'd done. And they returned to their home in Edinburgh, in Learmonth Gardens, Edinburgh. And to cut the story short, that poltergeist type phenomena developed there. And the phenomena seem to center around the bone. Eventually, Seton, Alexander Seton's uncle, who was a Father Benedict at Fort Augustus Abbey, beside Loch Ness, came to the house and performed a ritual. I don't know if it was a full exorcism or something less. And after the ritual, Seton burnt the bone, and the phenomena didn't recur. However, he said that from 1936 onwards, trouble always seemed to be around the corner. So that means sort of bad luck in effect. Both Seton and his wife, I don't know the cause of death. Neither of them made it to the 60s. They were I think they were about 32, early 30s when they were in Egypt and visited this tomb. Now you could see this as a curse. They kind of invoked some kind of curse by this stolen item from the tomb. Not the tomb, yes, the tomb. Another possibility is, if you think of this idea of the tricksterish intelligence, this is essentially an ordinary poltergeist case, but the intelligence behind it wanted to mix things up.
Capitalizing on that.
And capitalized on the fact that they'd visited this place and there was a stolen bone. So it kind of gave the impression that there was a curse, but it was playing games. So it's interesting. It's another, just very quickly, there have been cases of people returning stones they've taken from cairns, maybe sites, because they feel it's brought them bad luck. There was a story about a Belgian man who removed a stone from what are known as the Claver cairns. These are about 4,000 years old. They're to the east of Inverness. I think they're burial sort of chamber type thing. And he took these things home, and if things started happening, bad luck, I think he and his wife or something had some broken and injured leg or something like that. So I can't remember the details now, but he posted the bone, posted the rock back to the Tourist Information Centre in Inverness, and one of the employees there kindly took it back to the Claver cairns for him. Now, the problem with this is you don't know the statistics. I mean, let's say that 10,000 people had removed a stone from for the clock, and nothing had happened, and we hear of this one case.
Yeah.
When it does happen, you might think, oh, there's a curse here or something like that. But because we don't have the figures, the comparative data, and the same is true of a place in Hawaii, Volcanoes National Park. People have sometimes taken away bits of coral and so on. And there have been reports of people sending the stuff back or even returning it in person, feeling that they've been cursed.
There's obviously some influence, though, with the stone, with the items in Hawaii, to make that person think that is responsible. There's an influence.
Well, it could just be false attribution, that if I've done something slightly unusual, something a bit naughty, like taking something I shouldn't have done from a burial site or something like that, and then I break my leg and injure my arm, or my wife walks out on me or something like that, or I find her in bed with the next one. That this is somehow related to the.
Yeah.
But it could be that's just. There are many, many cases where that doesn't happen, and I'm making a false connection.
Yeah.
It's kind of so it's very hard to know, isn't it?
No, I like the way you're thinking that one out, Peter. Honestly, Les, because we're getting tight for time.
Yeah. Got a couple of questions left. Great questions tonight, folks.
We've not even got to anything really, but that's all good. It's great.
Right. Patricia Adams Wright is asking, is there any phenomena that can't be explained at all by the mind? Is there any phenomena that can't be explained at all by the mind? I know you've done a good job tonight, Peter, on trying to unravel and explain a lot of things in there.
Tonight.
I think the answer to that must be we can't say. I mean, we don't know. I mean, because anything we know or hear about or personally experience involves our mind. I suppose it's impossible to say that it doesn't involve the mind. There are phenomena that seem to be kind of large-scale things where you might not think the mind is involved, where maybe a plane is flying somewhere and it finds itself miles off course, and it's in the wrong area, and how did it get there? It doesn't seem to have used enough fuel to have got there, and that sort of thing, which you might say, surely that's not involving the power of the mind. But I don't think it's probably possible to say that, to eliminate the mind that way. I think the big answer to all these questions is we don't really know. And I think we can collect the data, try and conjecture, try and come up with theories, maybe try and test the theories if possible. But I wouldn't like to be too firm about anything, in terms of offering a too firm an explanation that I can't justify.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Well, the last question on my little tablet here is from Chris O'Neill, and Chris is asking, and I know we touched on this earlier, Peter, does Peter think Bigfoot and UFOs are linked?
Yes. In some cases, yes, and possibly, potentially in many cases. I've little doubt that there are some Bigfoot reports that are probably hoaxes. Some might be misinterpretation. It could be a brown bear or a black bear or something seen in conditions of light. However, I'm pretty impressed with some of the evidence, and I definitely do think that there is a link. And I'd strongly recommend a book by Stan Gordon, a Pennsylvania-based researcher, and it's called the UFO Bigfoot connection or something like that. I've got the book, but if you look up Stan Gordon Bigfoot, and you'll find this book, and it's got some fascinating cases in it which involve both UFO phenomena and Bigfoot phenomena, the same case, around the same time. So yes, I do think there's a connection.
Yeah. So then we've got through quite a few questions, and that's great. Where do you see yourself in future, Peter? More books, more feet on ground? What are you going to do?
Probably a pile of ash outside the crematorium.
Well, at least you can laugh about it. No, have you got plans to write any more?
No, well, I've got plans to maybe do articles. I don't like writing books. I find it draining, tiring, and stressful. After you've done it, what it's like. You look at the thing, you say, "Oh gosh, I don't know how to express that." It's a bit of perfectionism, really, that kind of makes it harder work. But so I haven't got any book plans at the moment, but I've said that before, right? That's the last book, and then, you know, after a while I start writing another one, you know. But
So just a few things. Do you think we're any closer to finding out what the true origins of all of this, what we've discussed in the last 2 hours, are about? Are we closer than we were?
Do you know? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I wonder if we came back in 1,000 years, we'd still be uncertain about some of these things. I suspect probably if there is reasonable research done and it's done in a consistent and meaningful way. I think the trouble is, to be honest, with a lot of university-based parapsychological research, is it's sort of it's not really often directing itself at paranormal phenomena at all. If you look at the thesis, it might be something like an examination of cultural beliefs and ghost storytelling in Central Europe. I mean, it's only touching on the paranormal in a little way, or paranormal belief related to neuroticism, you know, in a Chinese population in West London. I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit, but it's that kind of level of sort of off the, you know, and you wonder whether, you know, some of this. If I suspect that if I had £1 million, and I could say I could give it to the parapsychology department, or I could give it to the medical department, you know, to work on cancer or something, I'd probably give it to the medical department, because I suspect that if I gave it to the parapsychology department, I'll probably be hated if there are any parapsychologists, you know, listening to this, but that it would go on sort of theses like that, you know, and it might get people the title doctor, you know, if you write some complicated thing, and it might get the lecturer a bit of kudos if his student does well and gets a few papers published.
But it won't break new ground.
That's right. That's my fear. That's my fear. Yes.
So if there were any,
sounds terribly cynical, that doesn't it?
No, it's your views. It's as valid as anything else. And we've just about done. But just before we finish, if there were any location, UK, Scotland, the world, that you could visit, where would it be in connection with unexplained phenomena?
I think the Skinwalker Ranch would be interesting. Well, the trouble is, you might bring something home with you. And that's one of the things that's been reported with people visiting the Skinwalker Ranch. Some of the investigators, they've gone home and they've had phenomena in their own home. This phenomenon is in this country has been called contagion, the hitchhiker effect. Some people call it. I don't know why they've come up with that term. It doesn't make much. So the word contagion seems to be a better metaphor to me. So that risk, that's a place. There are some places that get a reputation which I think are probably almost a sort of a fanciful thing and maybe a lot of hype. One of them is the Hoia Baciu Forest in Romania. Now I think from what I've heard about that, and at one point I was thinking of going there because it sounded intriguing. But it seems from what I've further reading, there's a lot of hype about it, you know, and vague stories without specification of who the witnesses were, that sort of thing.
Dampened my spirits because I'd thought about it as well, but not to worry. I mean, it's good to know. And Peter, it's been an absolute pleasure, truly, as talking to you. You know, I know we've spoke for years intermittently, but not at this length, and I've really enjoyed it. And would you consider coming back on at some point?
Yes, of course. Yes.
We've not even touched the sides of the questions that I'd got for you, and the book. So, as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to end it there, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
No, thank you, Peter. It's been a pleasure, and I'll hand over to Les.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter and Paul, for tonight's show. Right, it just remains for me to say thanks everybody for coming on to tonight's live stream. It's been a great show, and as next week Paul said, it's Paula Green on, so that'll be another interesting show. Like I say, thanks to Peter McCue, Dr. Peter McCue, if I get the title.
No,
right.
don't be formal.
For coming on to tonight's show, and as I say, thanks for all the questions. Thanks for everybody who's been on the stream. There was one more question from Matt C. I noticed he came in a little bit late, so I'm sorry about I couldn't get that question in. And I think just to look at the chat, I think somebody noticed there was some white noise on my microphone. Well, because I've been out filming last weekend, we've just had a change of mics in here, so that might be the possible reason for that. So on that note, I've got to say everybody, have a great night and have a great weekend. I'll see you next week. Bye.